Well, we've now finished talking about Elkanah the man, obviously a good man. So let's move into the next verse. In chapter 2, it says, and he had two wives. Ooh. Yeah, guys, I'm not recommending you have two wives. Now, I'm going to explain to you in just a few minutes the why he probably had two wives. Let's continue on. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Also, the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. So this first part, in you can see that he has two wives. Again, like I said, not a good idea. However, back in that culture, it was accepted to have multiple wives. There was a number of reasons for that. But let's really focus on why Elkanah probably had two wives. It's Hannah is mentioned first. Most likely, Hannah was his first wife. Now, one of the first things that was supposed to happen, it was expected in part of the culture, is that you're supposed to have children right away. Well, obviously, within a matter of a short time, they realized that Hannah was barren and was not able to have children. So it's likely that Elkanah then took on another wife in the way of Peninnah, and immediately she started having children. So in that culture, the women obviously took the blame for not having children. It was never realized that there was men having a problem as well, like we do in our today's world. But back then, it was really that's how it was, is that women took the blame. So obviously, Hannah was the one that felt like she was barren. Now, it's very obvious to the story that God had a reason for it, but the reality is that's probably why Elkanah had two wives. Now, he loved them both very much. And it's very obvious as we go through the story, and we're going to read here in a little bit more, that he loved them very much. So let's actually do this. Go to verse 4 and 5. It says, and whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. So he loved them so much that he provided an opportunity for his wives and his children to participate individually in their relationship with the Lord, to have a walk with Christ. That is unusual. Usually the men were very much involved in the religious aspects of the day. The women were, like I said, considered property. The children were, just whatever. But the reality is he provided for his families to be able to participate in the relationship with Christ. That is truly the mark of a good man, a man who loves his family, loves his children, loves his wives. So despite, the culture of women being treated as property at the time, he was deeply concerned about Hannah. One day she was obviously very depressed, and he came to her, and so let's read what he asked of her. He says to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better than 10 sons? Do you see the hurt that is in his voice? Do you see what he's going? He recognizes something wrong with Hannah. Now, maybe a lot of men don't see that. I know that many times in my life I've been oblivious to the hurt feelings of my wife. I may have said something or done something, or somebody else said or did something to my wife, and I wasn't always aware of some of those things. But here is a very loving, questioning of Elkanah to Hannah, asking, what is it that's going on? Why are you so grieved? And at the same time, I'm also saying, hey, I'm right here. Aren't I better than 10 boys? Come on, I'm your husband. So there may have been a little bit of that as well. But I think it's very clear that Elkanah did love his wife, and he did care for her deeply. And he wanted to make sure that she was okay. Now, it's also very interesting that the book of Samuel was composed around the time of Solomon, right at the division of the kingdom. And I think this is really important because here we have the story of a very loving father to his wives, and then the story and the birth of Samuel, who was kind of the bridge between the judges and the kings. And it's very interesting that this book was probably written not too long after these stories happened, and so that we have the record of it. And it was written at a time when Israel needed to hear this loving God and what his purpose was for his people. And it was written right about the time that the kingdom was about ready to split. And so it's very interesting how it's all written, and it just shows God's love through the story of Elkanah, his love for his people. And I think that that's really, really important. Now, God could have been using these words to remind Israel that they had chosen to seek a king rather than him, rather than the person of Samuel, as you'll see later on, as it transitions from Judges to the book of Kings. So, such a powerful, loving story of this love of Elkanah towards his wife, and we hear that many times that God is like the groom, and the church is like his bridegroom. There's this great love for his church, and here there's this great love of Elkanah towards Hannah. Now, what's interesting is he did not allow the bitterness that could have arisen during this time with his wife, and the agony he felt of her being barren. It didn't affect his ability to continue to be affectionate and giving towards her. And obviously, he continued to share the wedding bed, so to speak, with her. And eventually she did bear Samuel. And then come to find out later on, he actually bore more children as well after Samuel. So he continued to love her and care for her like a husband should. And he demonstrated many, many times that he was a loving, caring husband. Now, here's the other thing, too, and I want to bring this to your attention. In verse 23, I know we're skipping a little bit here, but we're going to come back and we're going to go through all the verses. But in verse 23, it says, Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only let the Lord establish his word. Then the woman stayed and nursed her son until she had weaned him. This is when he was going, again, every year he went back to the temple to worship. He wanted to bring Hannah and Samuel with him. But she said, no, I need to wean him, and when the time is right, I will come. I will then give him over to the Lord at the temple. And Elkanah trusted her. He let her do that. He knew that she was right. Most guys was just, hey, just come with me. Do what I said, woman. But he didn't do that. He trusted her. He knew that she was doing the right thing. And so, again, it just demonstrates his love for her. What's interesting is this whole idea of let God's word be established. He also had a great faith. And I'm not going to explain all the Hebrew words in here, but the idea behind the Hebrew words is that God is the one, his word will come up and will become solid. It will become true. When God says something in this story here, both Hannah and Elkanah believed God's word and believed what he was going to do. So it's very, very powerful statements that we have here. So we talked about Elkanah, the husband. Let's talk a little bit about him being the father. Now, let's go back to verse 4 again. Again, it says here that he gave, when it came time for offering, he gave portions to Peninnah and her children. So he provided not only for his wife to worship the Lord and to give sacrifices, but he also provided for his children. He knew that it's his responsibility as a dad to teach his children about the Lord. Sometimes we as dads, we just don't do that. We're so busy with work or whatever else we're doing, and we don't realize that the most important thing that we do as a father is to raise our children to love Jesus. And we oftentimes don't do that. And that's really a sad thing. Now, I'm not trying to be down on this man, and I'm just more of a reminder that that's really the job, that's really the role that we're supposed to have. We're supposed to do that. We're supposed to care for our children in that way. Now, let's go to verse 20. I want to bring something up in verse 20 here. It's very interesting. It says, so it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son and called his name Samuel, saying, because I've asked for him from the Lord. She asked of him from the Lord and believed and knew that the source of children came from God. It's very interesting. Here's this barren woman. Have you thought about there's some other stories that talk about this and what a transitional time in history it was? We first have Abraham and Sarah. She was barren for many years and prayed and prayed and prayed. And finally God gave her Isaac. Completely changed the course of history. Israel traces itself through Abraham. He's called the father of the faith. He's their father. The beginning of the Jewish people is through Abraham. We also have, in a sense, a barren woman in the person of Mary, who, again, was obviously a very good woman. She was obviously wanted to be a mother one day and was surprised by this angel coming to her and saying she's now bearing God's son. And yet it started something brand new, which is the church. So here's this story of Samuel that has a very, very powerful thing. There's this barren woman, and God brings about a very special son who becomes one of the greatest prophets of the Bible. He's even got a book named after him. How about that? How many prophets in the Bible have books named after? Not very many. Samuel does. So here's this whole idea is that, Elkanah is very hopeful, and he wishes God that he would provide for his family. He does so by doing providing for the sacrifices. But at the same time, he also was making sure that he was caring for his wife, and when the time was right, she gave birth to a son, and he believed in her and trusted her. But in verse 24, it says this: Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with 3 bulls, 1 ephah of flour, a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. Now, it doesn't give a date, an age. We're probably 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there that he was weaned in that age bracket. So Elkanah then held up to the promise that his wife made, which was to give Samuel over to the Lord. Now, I'm a dad. I have 4 great kids. At that age, to give up one of my kids for that type of thing, that would be really, really hard. But he was obedient. He knew that his son was where he needed to be. His son needed to be obedient to the Lord in that way. Now, of course, we need to read the story of Samuel. There were still some things he needed to know about the Lord and his relationship with the Lord. But the reality